If a video game franchise goes on for long enough, eventually players will begin to form expectations for what future titles will be like, whether subconsciously or consciously. Once a franchise figures out what it wants to be, any deviations from that formula can be a risky gamble. In some instances, that gamble can pay off really well. Need for Speed Underground is a perfect example of this. Rather than having the gameplay revolve around driving exotic sports cars and supercars, Underground focused on the import tuner culture scene that had been experiencing a massive boom at that moment in time. Underground's deviation from the established norm at the time was so successful that it became the new standard moving forward. In other cases though, such deviations from the established norm don't go so well. And it's these kinds of bad deviations that I want to focus on today. We'll be looking at 3 games, all of which deviated from their respective franchises' established formulas, all to immense backlash. Let's dive right in and take a look at when deviations don't go so well. Let's talk about the obvious one first. Assault Horizon being in this video shouldn't be surprising to anyone. This game deviated from the established formula in order to pursue a more in-your-face, action-packed, adrenaline-rushing experience. Ironically though, because of how Assault Horizon's gameplay works, it makes those kind of intense, in-your-face moments dull and bland. But before I talk about all of that, we need to look at what the formula for Ace Combat had been up to this point. Ace Combat is a franchise all about letting us live out our aerial warfare fantasies. Often what we imagine aerial warfare to be versus how it's actually done is vastly different from one another. Ace Combat is there to let us entertain those fantasies, featuring planes and pilots that aren't affected by G-forces, insane amounts of ammunition, gigantic and powerful super weapons, and more. Ace Combat is here to let us become the badass ace pilots we were born to be. Ace Combat's gameplay consists of a player going through a briefing, picking their plane and special weapon, and then heading out for the mission at hand. Said planes and special weapons are unlocked by completing missions. You also usually earn a form of currency that is then used to buy planes and special weapons as they become available. During the minute-to-minute gameplay, you're given a set of objectives to complete and priority targets to destroy, but how you go about doing that is up to you. Taking into account the info that was given during the briefing, that will dictate what plane and special weapon you bring into battle. This freedom to pick whatever aircraft and special weapon you want is a huge reason why Ace Combat's core gameplay loop is so fun. Not only does it allow a great deal of player choice and freedom, but it also allows for tons of replay value. Skill plays its part in these games too. Even though Ace Combat is nowhere near a simulator, you do need to be aware of things like the basics of flying, good versus bad firing angles, a good sense of a particular plane's strengths and weaknesses, things like that. All of these engaging elements that make Ace Combat so great are thrown right out the window for Assault Horizon. For starters, the briefings are very inconsistent in this game. Some missions may have a detailed breakdown of what's going to happen, other times it'll be a cutscene of characters bantering with a general location and activity but nothing specific, and then there are cases where you don't get a briefing at all. I didn't cut anything out here. This is how the game transitions from the end of the mission Siege to the mission Hostile Fleet. You may also notice that the aircraft list here for Hostile Fleet is rather small. This must be in a new save during an early part of the campaign where I don't have a lot of aircraft unlocked yet, right? Yeah, about that. There is no progression in Assault Horizon, as you're given a set of aircraft to pick from for each mission. I mean, technically aircraft do become unlocked after missions, but because Assault Horizon chooses the available aircraft for you per mission, it's an honorary unlocking system more than anything. Granted, Assault Horizon isn't the first to take this approach to aircraft, as the Japanese version of Ace Combat 3 gives you sets of aircraft to pick from with no real unlock system. But that game had branching paths, a deeper story, and the developers were still piecing together what they wanted Ace Combat to be about. Assault Horizon, on the other hand, has no other elements to back up this approach to aircraft selection. There's no New Game Plus either, since every campaign mission gives you the same group of aircraft to pick from. The closest thing that this game has to New Game Plus is Free Mission, but even then, Free Mission skips all the cutscenes for a mission, small thing to point out, I know, but still, and you're still limited on what aircraft you can fly in some capacity, as you can only fly attackers for a single mission in the campaign. And to explain why, we need to talk about the core of Assault Horizon's deviation from the formula of Ace Combat. The number #1 reason why this game is considered by many to be the worst Ace Combat game, myself very much included, dogfight mode. Dogfight mode gets you up close and personal with the enemy, which on paper sounds cool. And I'll even admit, being able to see aircraft become gradually destroyed as shrapnel and oil covers your screen can be pretty neat. But the reason why DFM is an abomination is due to how it absolutely destroys any sense of skillful flying and strategy, and instead replaces that with just needing to follow the enemy aircraft until it's destroyed. All you need to do is chase after the enemy, get behind them, initiate dogfight mode, and then win. That's it. You don't need to utilize good firing angles, you don't need to make that strategy call on whether to use or save your special weapon ammo, none of that. And to add insult to injury, some of the enemies in this game are damn near impossible to shoot down unless you use dogfight mode. These kinds of enemies are labeled as aces, and they're often invincible up to a certain point. Reason being, the game so desperately wants you to go, "Whoa, that was intense, that was cool," in response to scripted close call moments. Except because it's painfully obvious what the game is trying to do, that makes those moments actually become painfully dull and boring. Look, the whole taking the hit in a non-critical area thing from 7 is a little goofy, even I'll admit. But with the levels of damage that enemy aces can soak up in dogfight mode in Assault Horizon, that makes 7's taking the hit in a non-critical area thing look like child's play. There's also an air-to-ground, air-to-ship variant of dogfight mode in the form of airstrike mode. Airstrike mode puts you on a set path as you perform a strafe run against enemy ground and naval threats. I know that when someone gets good enough at ace combat, the ground, sea, and buildings become their primary enemy and not any actual enemies, but come on, Assault Horizon. Oh, and speaking of airstrike mode, going back to my point of attackers only being usable for a single mission, because attackers can only perform airstrike mode and not dogfight mode, and because in every other mission where you fly a plane outside of flying a bomber for the first half of the mission launch, dogfight mode is required at some point, these aircraft right here can't be used outside of hostile fleet. There are also a couple of door gunner and attack helicopter missions, along with an AC-130 and bomber mission in there too, as if the other aspects of Assault Horizon didn't indicate the Call of Duty inspirations already. Normally, more variety in something is a good thing, but for a situation like this one, the helicopter and AC-130 missions are unnecessary in my eyes. It's like how in F123, for example, the game lets you drive supercars for specific events. Like, okay, cool, but we're here to drive Formula 1 cars. That's the same logic here. We're not here to be gunners and pilots for helicopters and gunners for AC-130s. We're here to fly planes. The bomber part of launch I'm letting slide because you're still flying a plane at the end of the day there, and even I have to admit, it's pretty cool to perform huge carpet bombing runs. You don't get to become the backbone of your nation's military here either. The single pilot that is so much of an ace that they can single-handedly turn the tide of a war, aside from the last mission at the very end when Magic says it's a battle between aces during the Markov fight. Speaking of bosses, I think that Markov is written fine, but his final boss fight is terrible because of how dogfight mode works. He's invincible up until the very end, you're railroaded through so many scripted moments that it becomes a parody of something like Call of Duty after a certain point, and the whole rivalry between him and Bishop seems to be forced. I get Markov's reasons for wanting to strike back at the US, but what his deal is with Bishop specifically, I don't know. Maybe there's more of an explanation in The Last Ace, a novel that serves as a prequel to Assault Horizon. I don't know. I'm gonna stop myself there before the whole video becomes a rant about why Assault Horizon is bad and get to my conclusion for this game. Besides, I'll need to save all of my complaints for the Assault Horizon retrospective whenever I get to it. The reason why Ace Combat Assault Horizon is a bad deviation from the formula is because the devs catered the game so hard to a specific crowd that they forgot what franchise it's a part of. It's a game that took too much inspiration from Call of Duty, not only literally with things like the Door Gunner and AC-130 missions, but also ideologically with how the campaign is structured. Call of Duty campaigns are usually very linear, requiring that players go about a mission in a specific way with a specific weapon in a specific order. That linearity is not compatible with Ace Combat, a franchise that, yeah, asks you to do objectives in a specific order, but most of the time lets you go about those objectives however you wish. Assault Horizon was too busy trying to cater itself to the Call of Duty crowd that it had the developers lose sight of what Ace Combat was for a moment. Many people playfully say that if you remove the Ace Combat part of the game's name, then suddenly it isn't as bad. But if that isn't a sign that Ace Combat went through an identity crisis with this game, then I don't know what is. Luckily, the developers seem to have learned their lessons since then, and the game that perfectly shows this is Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown, a game that didn't try to be something it wasn't. This time around, Ace Combat 7 knows what kind of game it is, and by being, well, an Ace Combat game and not a Call of Duty wannabe, this game and its developers were rewarded excellently. Gran Turismo 7 is such a frustrating game to play. The core driving experience and the attention to detail is amazing, but just about everything else is at best annoying and at worst asinine. Things didn't used to be like this though. Back with games like Gran Turismo 3, 4, and 5, those titles were praised for being fun and engaging experiences that blended an unrivaled love and passion for cars with fun racing. To paraphrase video game essay creator Casey for this next line, a paraphrasing that I've done before in my own video on Gran Turismo 7, Gran Turismo is about starting slow and ending fast, but how you get from point A to B is entirely up to you. Or rather, it used to be entirely up to you, but we'll get there in a minute. Focusing on the previous titles for a moment, every single player's journey from start to finish will be different and unique in some way. What cars you use, when you do license tests, what order you complete events in, things like that. There's enough freedom to let you have your own personal journey throughout these games, but also just enough roadblocks in place to ensure that there's a sense of progression. Because of that freedom, you're able to play these games at your own pace. All of that goes out the window with Gran Turismo 7. As I hinted at earlier, I've already made a full-length video about why I consider Gran Turismo 7 single player to be an utter failure in game design, so I'll give a summary version here. If you'd like to check out that full video after this one, a link will be in the description. So, how does Gran Turismo 7 deviate from the formula and why is it bad? That freedom I mentioned earlier, about being able to pick whatever cars you want and do events in whatever order you want and all of that, none of that is here. Instead, Gran Turismo 7 single player consists of these damn cafe menu books. You progress through these menu books, collecting the cars that are in each one by completing events to earn them, or by just straight up purchasing them. Gone are the days of everyone having their own unique journey by picking different cars and events in order to progress through the game. Now, for the first 20 plus hours, everyone's journey will be the exact same aside from when exactly people choose to do things like the license tests. And you can't even escape the cafe menu books after completing the main game, as there are extra ones for you to fill up after that. Granted, these ones are optional, but the way Polyphony wants you to collect cars in this game presents another issue. In Gran Turismo 7, you're often collecting cars for the hell of it rather than because you truly want them. In the earlier games, the large majority of the time, you'd be incentivized to buy faster cars to progress the game, yeah, but you usually had enough freedom to pick which faster cars you wanted. Oh, and don't even get me started on the Legends dealership. There you have cars that can be as expensive as 20 million credits that can barely be used in any of the main events, if at all, requiring that you take them to custom races to get any real use out of them. But custom race payouts are atrocious, so you're incentivized to not spend time in these, which sucks because the customization options for custom races can be really nice, especially the options that allow you to use the cars that you've collected as opponents, along with being able to change the drivers' names. I mentioned earlier that Gran Turismo 7 is a frustrating game for me to play, but for the people who grew up with this franchise, the Gran Turismo veterans, I can't imagine how betrayed they must feel. If you want to see what a Gran Turismo veteran thinks of GT7, I'd highly recommend Rafa Waffle's near 3.5 hour video, where he combines the individual videos he's made critiquing GT7 into essentially a feature-length film. A link will be in the description for that video as well. The reason why Gran Turismo 7 is a bad deviation from the formula is due to player freedom being stripped away, along with the developers being stubborn about their choices. It's one thing to have asinine game design, that's already bad enough, but it's a whole different thing for the developers to do nothing about it. I didn't even talk about things like the roulette tickets, invitations, the microtransaction fiasco at launch, and more in this video. I do talk about those in my dedicated Gran Turismo 7 video though. Gran Turismo 7 was released in March 2022. This game will be 3 years old next month, and in that time, Kazunori Yamauchi and the rest of Polyphony Digital have done jack shit to fix the core issues of the game. I get not wanting to change things because you want players to see your vision for the game, but after seeing players constantly complaining and begrudgingly putting up with the mechanics of the game for nearly 3 years, at some point you have to ask yourself if it's worth it to stay on that path. I mean, I guess there's no real reason to make any sweeping changes at this point. The damage has already been done to Gran Turismo, Polyphony Digital, and Sony. This makes me really worried about what Gran Turismo 8 will bring. Whereas with Assault Horizon, we have the power of hindsight and the comfort of seeing the Ace Combat series back on its feet and hitting stronger than ever before. Given that Gran Turismo 7 is the latest entry as of this video, we don't have those luxuries here. We'll just have to wait and see if Polyphony Digital and Sony have learned their lesson. Whereas Gran Turismo 7 is an utter failure in single-player game design, Battlefield 2042 is an utter failure across the board. It's been some time since I made my video on my thoughts about Battlefield 2042, so I think a quick refresh as to why I dislike No, why I hate this game is in order. I don't use the word hate lightly when it comes to video games, but 2042 is one of the few cases where it applies perfectly. Before we get to that though, we need to talk about what made Battlefield so great in the past. Battlefield is a franchise where you step into the role of some kind in a larger battle. A rifleman, sniper, helicopter pilot, jet pilot, tank operator, etc. Unlike Call of Duty, for instance, where everyone can more or less fend for themselves without any help from teammates aside from everyone contributing to the winning condition, Battlefield requires that you work together as a team in both small and large ways in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Using Battlefield 4 as an example, the Assault class can heal and revive allies. Engineers can destroy enemy vehicles and repair allied ones. Support can keep the team stocked up on ammo. Recons can provide valuable intel in the form of spotting and laser designating. Tanks are big and hefty machines with long, thick, girthy cannons that can wipe the floor with light armor and infantry. Mobile anti-air can declare the skies above a no-fly zone, and more. No matter what role you fulfill, you have strengths. But no matter what role you fulfill, you also have weaknesses, giving a reason for people to work together. All thanks to the class system for infantry and the great balancing for vehicles. All set in a military setting, most of the time anyway, where the tone of war being brutal and harsh is conveyed through the environments, voice acting, music, etc. with no tonal whiplash. Say it with me now. All of that goes out the window in Battlefield 2042. Battlefield 2042 is a complete betrayal to the series, all for the sake of chasing trends rather than creating all new ones. When the game launched, there was no class system. Instead, there was the specialist system, where everyone could use any gadget and piece of equipment. Rather than needing to cooperate with different class types to win the day, everyone could become their own one-person army. And speaking of these specialists, the tonal whiplash is insane. 2042 is set in a universe where entire nations have crumbled and the world is in a complete state of disarray. So for the specialists to be treating each fight for survival as if it were an airsoft or paintball match is just dumb.
That was something, right? Yeah, Angel does it again. Don't be sad. This is just how it works out sometimes.
Hazard Zone, the extraction royale, was dead on arrival. This mode lasted for only a couple of months before support was pulled entirely. And lastly, Portal mode. God, this one hurts the most. Portal mode not only contained partial remasters of Battlefield 1942, Bad Company 2, and Battlefield 3, but it was also a custom games creator with an in-depth logic editor to allow people to go wild with their creations. I had all sorts of custom game modes planned for when this game launched. To give one as an example, one team would need to get their tank from point A to B, with the tank having an insane amount of health but not able to receive repairs. The attackers would need to get their tank to the other side, and the defenders would have to destroy it. But none of that has happened, and it never will happen, because the XP amounts for Portal were severely restricted in response to people creating bot farm lobbies to exploit the progression system. The 64v64 player battles were swapped in favor of the usual 32v32 player battles, as 64v64 proved to be too chaotic for the gameplay to work well. As a quick recap, the specialist system, 128 player battles, Hazard Zone, Portal mode. All of these were touted features and modes that were promoted heavily during the game's marketing. All of these were supposed to be mainstays for the game. However, the specialist system was reverted back to the class system. But even then, the class system update was a band-aid fix because the core gameplay was built with the original specialist system in mind. I still want this band-aid fix over the original specialist system, don't get me wrong, but it's not the silver bullet that DICE and EA wanted it to be. 128 player battles were walked back to 64 player battles. Hazard Zone lasted only a few months before support was pulled, and with Portal mode's XP severely restricted, there's no incentive for anyone to play it. Every single aspect that 2042 was banking on being reasons that people would love this game was walked back or effectively killed off. If that isn't a total failure of a game in its entirety, then I don't know what is. Battlefield 2042's deviation from the formula is bad because those at the top were willing to throw away everything that made this franchise unique among other FPS games in the pursuit of chasing trends. This is a prime example of how for a lot of AAA companies, video games are seen as money generation products and not actual works of art that should be shown genuine care, love, attention to detail, and more. Battlefield 2042 is the latest Battlefield title as of this video, one that I would argue has done irreparable damage to everyone involved. Only time will tell whether the Battlefield franchise can recover. Unlike with Gran Turismo, where I can still see myself pre-ordering Gran Turismo 8 because I'm willing to bet the core driving experience will still be fully intact at least, I will not be pre-ordering pre-ordering the next Battlefield title. Remember, no pre-orders. Hold the line. Remember what happened with Battlefield 2042. After being hyped up to hell and back for 2042 leading up to its launch, I'm not going to be fooled twice. With how negative this video has been, I can see how some people may get the impression that I think deviations from established formulas are inherently bad, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. Deviations can be done to great success. How, you might be asking? The answer is quite simple, actually. The game just needs to be fun to play. If I were to go back to each of the games we looked at in this video and separate them from their respective franchises, I would argue that they aren't fun games on their own, even outside of any franchise standards and expectations. If a deviation can be fun on its own, though, then who cares if it goes off the beaten path? Of course, not every deviation is going to be everyone's cup of tea, but if the game plays well, then the worst that people could say is that it's not for them. Deviations aren't inherently bad. They just need to be what every video game ever made sets out to do: be fun to play. These 3 games we looked at today aren't. Therefore, they don't achieve that goal of being fun, and therefore are deviations that didn't go so well.